I thought I would start by just describing what IBS is. Some of you watching this may have actually had a diagnosis of IBS and may be very clear what it is. Others of you may think it's a term that has nothing to do with you. You've just got a bowel that doesn't work well. And so I thought it was worth clarifying that. IBS is just an umbrella term for a bowel that isn't working well, which means that people with IBS may be experiencing bloating, cramping, or sometimes even considerable pain. And they may be suffering from constipation or loose urgent stools, or sometimes alternating between, sometimes being constipated and sometimes having to rush to the loo. So all IBS means is that your bowel isn't functioning well, but you haven't got a disease, you haven't got an infection, and you haven't got an abnormality of the bowel. It just isn't working very well. And colonics can be so helpful for working with IBS symptoms. Sometimes the bloating or the constipation, the urgent stools, are to do with eating something that's disagreeing with you. Many people go to their GP saying, am I allergic to something? And the GP does a full allergy test and then comes back and says, no, you're not allergic to it. And so I've had people who've continued eating things that have really upset their bowel for years and years, thinking, well, my doctor told me I wasn't allergic to it, it must be fine. But there's a world of difference between allergy and food sensitivity. An allergy is where you have a full-blown inflammatory response mediated by histamine. A food intolerance or a food sensitivity just means that it upsets your bowel. It may give you pain, it may give you cramping, or it may just slow everything down or mean that your body just wants to chuck this food out as quickly as possible. And when people come to me for colonics, one of the things that we do is to look at their diet, see what they're eating, seeing if anything obvious sort of jumps out at me that may be unhelpful in what they're eating. And so going into the future, if you have a colonic and then take something out that may be a troublesome element of your diet, the colonic takes away any residue of the food, thus enabling your body to get back into balance that much more quickly. And also for people suffering with constipation, although most people who have constipation think that their muscles of their colon are weak or lazy or just sort of slack and lacking tone, very often it's actually quite the opposite. When food goes through the colon, it's propelled by a series of muscular contractions, sort of one after the other, a bit like milking a cow. And when these muscle contractions happen in a nice synchronized, coordinated, rhythmic way, one pushing it up, then the next, and the next, then it works really well. But when your bowel is out of kilter and things are not working so well, these muscles become much more reactive, sometimes going into spasm, sometimes just not going into a nice rhythm. So it's as if the contractions are just sort of random all over the place and the food never progresses well through the colon. And thus you can have really strong muscle tone, as you in some ways know by gurgling sounds and cramping, but food isn't moving well through you. And obviously sometimes the food is being propelled so violently by the muscular contractions that you end up with loose stools or even diarrhea. And what colonics does is it uses warm water to really soothe and calm the muscles of the colon and just reduce that spasm, enable things to get back into harmony, enable the muscular contractions to become synchronized and coordinated again. So in order for the colon to work in this harmonious way where everything flows well and evenly, colonics can play a huge part. Sometimes a warm water colonic can just soothe and calm those muscles, and it's almost like flipping a switch. Just one treatment brings everything back into balance and everything works beautifully. But more often it's things evolve over a period of time, coming back to me for 2 or 3 treatments. Each time we check over what's happened before, we look at your diet again, and by introducing different foods that are supportive of the gut, sometimes that can be fermented foods, sometimes it can be using probiotics or supplements, or it can be taking out some foods that maybe we didn't spot before might have been problematic. And combining that with colonics, both water at the right temperature to encourage good function and also getting rid again of any residue of any foods that were unhelpful, over time it is really such a rewarding way to work, because I see people who come to me because their whole lives are dominated by what their bowel is or isn't doing. Just be able to have that just as part of something that slips into the background, so they can concentrate on the most important thing, which is living life to the full, with their bowels working well. So why not come and see whether together we can find ways to bring your bowel, your colon, back into healthy functioning.